Okay, active record validations. Validations is a tool that we're going to be using to sanitize the data that comes into our database. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Before we get into that, I want to ask a quick question. What's the point of test-driven development?
To test your work, to make sure it works.
To write less breakable code.
To validate.
What was that last one?
So what it said,
Validate.
good to validate.
What to validate? To validate something?
To validate your work.
Okay.
I'd say like similar thing to branches in GitHub, so that we know that it works with like a larger body of work.
And like as things progress, if changes are made that might affect something in the beginning, that you can see it because it's going to break the code and the test is going to show it.
Yeah, it can help you correct your code if it's broken.
I was gonna say quick feedback.
Namir, what'd you say?
I said it'd help you just correct your code, basically.
That is a really solid understanding of TDD, everybody. I genuinely appreciate it. Who here feels like TDD takes at least double the amount of time just normal coding would take? Cool. So there's something called ROI in corporate business, which is called return on investment. If you invest into something and it doesn't give you more money in return, generally speaking, as a business, that's a bad idea. It's got a very bad return on investment or a negative return on investment. So here's a good question, just from a very plain thinking perspective. Why is TDD so popular amongst large corporations?
So they can make sure what they're paying you for is actually working.
It saves them time in the long run because they don't have to go back to try to fix their work.
Yeah, the quality of code developers make using TDD is so high that, in fact, it's worth it for them to have their developers work at half the pace or even slower, because that way you're never going back and refixing something that broke in the past, if possible. So TDD is a really important concept. We're going to be practicing some of that today. All right. Another question. Actually, let's do that. I hope to answer for all of you today. Come on, all together. Is what's the point of a validation? And I'm going to tell this up front. The point of a validation is to ensure that only the data that we want gets into our database. People aren't sending over stacks of code into our database called a SQL injection. People aren't sending over spam of just 1,000 entries into our database that are not unique, that just spamming the same thing over and over again. Can anyone figure out why data that we want to come into our database being super specific would be important? Or does anybody know the name of the kind of attack that some other malicious user can make where they load up your database with garbage data?
DDoS.
A DDoS attack, a distributed
Denial of service.
denial of service. Thank you. DDoS attacks come in like 14 to 15 different flavors. And one of them is where you set up a bunch of computers with a bunch of for loops that run infinitely. And all they do is they try to load up garbage information to your server. Or to your application. And DDoS attacks happen to the most mundane of applications out there because 14-year-olds think it's funny. And they think they can flex on people if they can prove that they're a real hacker by creating a DDoS. So we are going to create something called validations where our Rails application will reject certain information from being loaded into our database and therefore from overwhelming our database or creating too much heat, quite literally too much heat on our server platform, which in our case is our MacBook Airs. Which, trust me, you'll get to the point where those MacBook Airs are running hot if you're not already there. So that's a little bit of what we're going to be doing that. And the way we're going to be ensuring that our validations work is by using something called specs. We've used specs before. Can anyone remember what specs stand for? We've used specs where it had a certain letter in front of it.
R spec.
Yeah. Okay. So what does the spec of our spec stand for?
Rails or Ruby.
The spec of our spec stands for specifications. And specifically, a specification is a kind of test that doubles as a kind of pseudocode or message to other developers that lets them know the specifics of what we're looking for to work with our database. So all of that effort that we put into pseudocoding, we're going to start this long journey of transitioning that effort of that explanation with plain language into these kinds of tests that also explain what we're looking for. And this journey takes about a month, no lie. But we've learned how to think in plain language, and now we're going to start learning how to think in plain language and explain what we're looking for via tests, giving testing scenarios. That's what's going on today. We're going to start that journey. Sound good? All right. Awesome. That's a lot of talking. What the crap is a validation? A validation is a Rails method that can be set up in a number of different ways depending on what arguments we've passed to it. So we're going to find a special spot inside of our Rails application, and that spot we're going to bring in validations that let our Rails application know only this data, and you have to have this data coming into our application. There are a number of ways to keep an application safe. Validations is scratching the surface of the first time we've looked at keeping our application safe. So we are in this class, we're going to learn 4 different ways to keep our application safe. Validations is the first way we're learning. Cool? The job of a validation is to reject improper data. Oh, that's new. And the secondary job of a validation is to send back this appropriate status error code. Who can tell me what a status code is when we're talking about the internet?
404.
Okay.
202.
202. What are status codes though?
It's,
Just
I
a
remember, I'm sorry, I remember Sarah showing us the little cat, image thing.
Uh-huh.
I believe it's something like that.
Okay. Those are a good example of the status codes themselves.
Okay.
But where does a status code come
developers.
from?
Your responses.
Okay, responses from what?
from the server. It's just a quick way to tell you what's going on.
It's supposed to
Yeah.
help the
So-
developer, not the user. If that makes sense.
So when a front end application or some sort of application makes a request to a back end, the back end responds with two things: a status code and a what?
Message.
Only if we tell it to. What's that message held inside of?
Response.
All right. Who's got the big thing that Sarah drew available to them? I'll pull it up. This is something you are all going to want to know deep in your hearts.
The URL was
The Google
HTTP.
Drive.
Yeah, I'm pulling up the Google Drive right now.
Is it the payload, the status and payload?
Yeah, a payload, a status code, and a payload. So status codes are the 100s, the 200s, the 300s, 400s, and the 500s. And there's a bunch of status codes inside of them. When we make a request to a server, that server responds to us. So we call this the request response cycle. So imagine you have a ball in your hand and you throw the ball to somebody else. You're sending out a request and their job is to throw the ball back to you, and that's a response. And when we send a request to a location, which is a URL or IP address, and we give it a kind of action. The response has a status code and a payload, which generally speaking is HTML, so we can look at a website. All right. These things that Sarah drew out, you're kind of want to like carve onto your hearts a little bit. You're going to want to really know this stuff because this is the bread and butter of being a web developer. We got to know this stuff. So the request response cycle. Request has two sections, response has two sections. So the job of validations is to send back the appropriate status code. We'll say the appropriate error / status code. I shouldn't say error / I want to say error and status code. We'll take a look at this in a second. All right, so that's the gist of what we're going to be doing. So I need to start an application. Let's call this application validations. I'm going to drop the database, add in PostgreSQL, and drop the testing framework. And we're going to need a new set of instructions today for getting set up with our testing framework that we are going to be using with our Rails applications, because we've only been dropping the testing framework. We have not been using any testing. So once we have dropped our testing framework using the -T, we're going to need to bring something else in. So first I'm going to cd into validations. And inside of validations, I'm going to say Rails DB create. And I'm going to bring in a gem called rspec Rails using bundle. Bundle, like Yarn, is a package manager, but specifically a package manager for Rails, not just for Ruby. And this package manager takes Ruby gems and installs them into the Rails application in all the different places they need to be installed. So where a gem installs to the root of our computer, a bundle installs into our project. And from the bundle add rspec Rails, I'm going to use the Rails generate command, calling on that rspec gem and passing to it a command called install, which actually is a file that can be found inside of the rspec gem. Just like Rails DB migrate, or a folder that could be found inside of there. And this one created for us some new files. Can I get someone to read off the files that were made here and folders that were made here?
Create rspec, create spec slash spec underscore helper.rb, create spec slash rails helper.rb.
Cool. So spec doesn't have a file extension, which tells us that spec is actually a folder, and we can see this new folder inside of our application here. I'm gonna grab the markdown file, bring it, nope, come back, bring it right here, and close this out so we don't have to have that in our way. And I'm going to change to using probably the VS Code terminal from here on out. All right, and if I'm being honest, at this point, I need us to make up a model for us to work with today. My example that I built out for today was a blog, but we did a blog yesterday. So what do you think? Some sort of sports tracker of players, or musical instrument tracker, food tracker, pet tracker? What do you want?
Fancy football.
Football?
Sounds
Are we
good.
thinking American football or global football?
American football.
American.
American football. All right.
Global.
America.
Goal. I'm sorry.
Okay, so I'm inside of validations. Rails generate model just player, footballer.
Fancy football.
Player, org, position.
Let's do player. Players have a name. That name is going to be a string data type.
They got a position. You spelled position.
Do they have a number?
Yep. Yeah.
What else can we bring in? What's like a stat that of theirs that we can bring in?
Touchdowns.
General manager.
That would be another table called managers or something like that. These are players.
Special team.
We could do team.
Or definitely touchdowns, depending on the position.
Yeah, I guess it'd be position would determine if it's front, what, if offensive, defensive, and then
Right.
touchdown would be relative to position.
Mm-hmm.
So what's something else other than touchdown that's good for defensive? A good tracker for defensive positions.
Tackle.
Linebacker. Linebacker.
Sacks.
TD and tackle.
Yeah.
So essentially we'll write some sort of logic. If you're offensive, we're looking at TD. If you're defensive, we're looking at tackle.
That's a good one.
All right. I think we could use a longer brainstorming session for this application. Maybe we'll end up migrating some of this a little bit later, but this feels good to get started for today.
You misspelled position.
Ooh, that sucks.
Position.
Position. All right. The one way we could deal with this is we could do a migration, but we honestly haven't migrated our database yet. So what I can do is I can actually do a Rails destroy model player. And then come back and fix this model since we notice it right now. Pause issue. Yeah.
Yep.
All right, now I have the proper migration. Rails DB migrate. Cool. My schema is up. We're ready to go. Any questions? Okay, something new popped up when we did our generate model, because normally we just have these two files are generated, the migration and the model player itself. So inside of app, we have model, we have player. But something new got popped up. Jason, can you read this off for me?
Invoke RSpec. And create spec/models/player_spec.rb.
You betcha. Down here in this new folder that we have of spec, there's another folder called models, and inside of models is a file called player spec. And player spec has some stuff going on with it. Player spec has this block in here. Does anybody recognize this kind of syntax? Require and rspec describe class?
When we did the RSpec lecture.
Yeah. Okay, so here's a good question. This pathway is spec models player spec. What would be the command? What's the command for running an rspec file?
Describe it. Expect.
Check this out. I can just run rspec. Where did I put it? Rspec spec models player spec. And in here, it ran this testing file for me. Cool stuff, huh? Okay, who's tracking? Who has an idea of what we're about to do? Guesses. So someone shoot out a guess. What are we about to do? We're about to write some tests.
To
We're
validate.
about to write some tests of data trying to get into our database. Bad data trying to get into our database. And what we're going to try to do is we're going to, after we set up this bad data trying to get into our database, we're going to set up the code that rejects that data. Sound good? So we are going to act like hackers. We are going to try to come up with tests of stuff that a hacker would do, and then we are going to reject that data. Pretty cool, huh? All right, first thing we're going to do is we are going to delete what is in here. Actually, I want to just put this down here just so we can see this. Spec models player spec.rb. Okay, so what this requires is us to think a little backwards. We have to think about the goal of rejecting a hacker, right? Like if somebody's trying to hack into my system or trying to shut down my system with a DDoS attack, I have to have a goal of shutting that person down. And so the goal here is to come up with a test that will check for data trying to get into my database and then rejecting that insert of data. So that's what we need to do. All right, inside of our spec describe player, I'm going to create a new describe block. This describe block is going to take the argument of player model, and I'm going to pass to it a do block so that we can give it a series of different it blocks. This step isn't terribly important. We could skip over this step, but it's really helpful for setting up things later down the road for us as developers. I just lost 2 people. Do we need a 5-minute break? We're good? Okay. Inside of this, we are going to create a testing statement. It throws an error if name is empty. That sounds like a pretty good test, right? We need to make sure that you try to throw something into my database that doesn't have a player into my database that doesn't have a name. Like you're trying to load up my database with blank values. I'm going to say no. You have to give me a player with their actual name. Cool. So what I want to do here is I want to set up that situation. I'm going to create player equals, and this is just a variable, player dot create. And what were the values that our player had? Does anybody remember off the top of their head?
Name.
Position.
Name, position spelled with a POS. number, and TD tackle. Okay, so name. If I'm going to use a data type that represents empty values, what is that data type?
No.
Right.
No.
Nil. Name is nil. Then we had position, which honestly I can just like copy that. I don't have to push myself super hard. Position. Our random non-player, what's their position? We're gonna be copying and pasting a lot of this. So let's just, who's a player that we're gonna end up using, by the way?
Quarterback, just, we'll use, I don't know, Lamar Jackson.
Okay. And then do we say Lamar Jackson?
Yeah,
What's Lamar Jackson's number?
I think he's 8.
And then what's his TDs or tackles? Lifetime TDs or tackles?
I'll tell you in 2 seconds. 84.
All right. So should position have something like QB and offensive, so that way we don't have to check for like everything, like every single position? Thoughts?
What was the question again?
He's got 105 total touchdowns, but 84 passing.
Jason, what are your thoughts? Do we go with totals or
Talking
do we go
about
with passing?
tackle. Tackle is defensive.
I say because the QB is the most unique position on the field. So, that's a tough one, man.
It doesn't actually matter to me. I just need to know which one.
Oh,
Bigger number, better person. Bigger number, better person. All right. So we have this variable. And what is this variable being set to? Specifically, if we didn't have all this information, we didn't know who we were talking about, maybe we're talking about a fictional character. What is this thing happening right here? What is this variable being set to?
An object.
Okay. But specifically, what kind of object?
A player.
Okay. Look past the idea of a player. I really want you to
Model.
think about what this is happening right here.
Adding a player.
A array.
Not an array.
Uh-huh.
Model.
So this is tricksy, and I'm aware that it's tricksy. We are setting this variable to the result of the active record query of .create. Because .create as an active record method, remember, is trying to make that SQL query inject into some other stuff. And this variable is going to be the result of that.
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
Yeah, this one's tricksy. There are essentially 3 things going on here. One of them is we all have in our brain this idea of player right now. We kind of have to take that idea and set it to the side for a second. The second thing is we have 2 things happening. We have a Ruby variable and we have an active record query. So 3 things are happening all at once. We know what a player is, we know what Ruby is, and we're kind of getting used to active records still, right? And so this active record query is trying to take all this data. It doesn't care about this person. It doesn't know about this player. It has no information. It's just trying to take this data and send it to a database. Once it's done that, whatever that response is from the database, all of that response is being saved in this variable, this Ruby variable. Weird, huh? A lot of stuff happening. I'll take notes of that probably when we're done today, since I want to wrap up here in about 20 minutes.
Thank you.
So let's check out what's going on with this player, because what I want to happen is I want this to do something specific, right? What am I looking to have happen right here?
Gives you an error.
Yeah, I want this to throw an error. And so specifically, I'm going to look at this variable of player. And this variable of player, as a response from the database, I want it to have a nested object inside of it called errors. Rails will do this work for me. You guys just need to know that Rails, when it actually rejects something, it'll give it a special object called errors, and it'll send it back to you. So kind of imagine you have a ball, maybe a football. You throw the football to your friend, and your friend says, I don't want to play. But the way they do that is they take a Post-it note and they smack it on the football and they send that back to you. And then you get a football with a Post-it note on it, and you can read that Post-it note that says, I don't want to play. It's kind of a shitty way to communicate with your friend, but that's helpful because that's how computers work. And so this errors object has inside of it, or is going to have something inside of it called name. And specifically, the error we're looking for is going to be called name. All right. So we have our test. We have our test situation where we have arranged a situation, but we don't have any expectation or assertion on that, right? We don't have an expect statement here. So we have our describe, we have our it, but we don't have an expect. So what we're going to expect is player dot errors at name to not be empty. Okay. This next part's very important. You track with me. What are we trying to do right now? What's the goal of this test?
Whether it's empty.
Okay. And have I written the code to make this test pass?
Right now, no.
So what won't be empty, or what will be empty?
Never.
We are not going to get an error, but what color will our test be?
Red.
Yellow.
Red.
Red.
So we are not going to get an error, but our test will be red. Ready? All right. Expected errors empty to be falsy, but it got true. One example, one failure. Okay, so we are practicing good TDD, correct?
Don't you need it to pass?
No, I think we want it to fail.
First, we want it to fail. Then we want it to pass. Then we want to refactor if we need to. Okay, now we need to go write the code, which is the actual validation on the data column name. The way we do that is inside of our app, inside of our models, we go to player. And inside of our model for player, we are going to bring in a method called validates. Validates takes an unlimited number of arguments, as many arguments as you want to pass it, but they have to be represented in that model / that table in the database. But the last argument it takes is always, the last argument it takes determines what kind of validation that it is distributing. In this case, we're going to validate for something called presence. And we're going to tell it the presence for name must be true. You cannot hack my system by sending me a bunch of players without names. My fantasy football league. That's funny. My fantasy football league will not allow you to spam 2 billion players into my database without names. Cool. Yeah. All right. Now we have a test that checks for the presence of player, i.e. it throws an error if name is empty. We're trying to load up a player that doesn't have a name. We are logging that result, and then we're running an expectation on this player on what we're going to get. And specifically, we're looking for an error, and we've just added the code that requires / validates data only if there is a name that is present. Doesn't tell us what the name has to be. You just have to have one. Go back, run the test. And we got the error can't be blank from Rails, and everything passes. Woo! Ah! We're protected from hackers on name. Well, in one category. That's pretty cool, huh? Also, a little bit, intense. I appreciate that there's already a shirt for that.
So in our spec, you just did, or yeah, you did just error, if there's an error. Now, can we be more specific in which errors that we're looking for?
Cliff, on it. All right, so now we're going to be specifically looking for this one particular error to be can't be blank. Ooh, what did it? 2S? Oh, interesting. Look at that. It gave me to be for this entire object, target equals can't be blank. I wonder if I need to put it inside of some brackets or something like that. Oh, I'm wrong on the method. That's what's going on. To equal can't be blank. There it goes. So this error is specifically held inside of an array. And so I'm going to tell it needs to be the data type of array. And inside of that array needs to exactly have one string at the index of 0 that says can't be blank. Weird, huh? But this is the exact error that we're testing for now. Okay, whose brain feels like I turned it upside down 3 times and are dizzy?
No, it's just the last one you just did is the to not and to equal. So they both basically both of them putting out the same error.
Yes, these are the same error, but specifically it says there is an error. And then Cliff asked, can we be specific about which error? And I said, yes, we can be specific about which error. And in fact, that's a very good idea because this one doesn't tell us which error we got. This just tells us we got some error. And this one checks for the exact error that we're looking about.
So if we're in a real situation, shouldn't mostly we should be focusing on the dot to equal instead of the other one. Just
I
be
disagree.
general.
I would like to have both, right? Because I would like to know if I got an error that wasn't the exact one. That way I can investigate it. If this one passes, but this one fails, I know something weird is going on. I got an error I wasn't expecting, but it still got an error. Weird, huh?
Question about line 11.
Uh-huh.
So you're expecting the name to be an exact string, can't be blank. Where is can't be blank thrown?
Can't be blank is being thrown inside of this response variable. A key value pair, an object of errors is being appended to that as its own key value pair by Rails itself, by this active record response. And then inside of that object, there is a key value pair called name. And we are using the symbol key notation to highlight that name. And that name is a key value pair where its value is an array. And that array has one index inside of it, one value inside of it that says can't be blank.
So you didn't come up with that. That was made up through Ruby.
Through Rails.
Through
Correct.
Rails. What other ones? Is there a list of all the errors that Rails will throw that we can reference?
Yep. You can, and they're just a Google search away.
Austin, can you show the error if it's not passing?
The error if it's not passing?
Yeah, because right now it's passing because we have
Oh, as in if we didn't have the validation?
yes.
So that's just a red test. So just to clarify, this is not an error. This is just a failed test. So that's standard. What we're looking for is a test where we haven't written a code that'll make our test pass. And then we write the code that'll make our test pass. Run that, and we get green. And this green exists because we're getting the correct error. Errors are our friends because we are now the developers who are utilizing errors to get stuff done. All right, let's write a couple more. So we have player, we have name, position, number, and TD tackle. So let's write some validations for each of these. So I'm going to grab this test because it's so useful. And we're going to say it throws an error if position is empty. Cool. Who's the name of our QB here?
Lamar Jackson. I have a question about those symbols there. How do you know and when to put the colon in front or after?
A symbol is a data type that has the colon in front. It's a special kind of string identifier essentially you have to know that you're utilizing a symbol, but this symbol represents the column in our database. A colon after generally is something that is requiring some sort of key value evaluation. So we look back in here, presence is going to be a value that we're passing to that value, that key, the value of true. So presence needs to know what kind of presence we're looking for, true or false presence.
Okay.
So validates is a method that takes symbols of name, and then it takes the key value pair of presence and then something else, presence true or presence false. All right, cool. So I just copied and pasted this entire test and I only changed what about it. Can I get a volunteer to walk through what I changed? Cliff.
You changed, we're checking position, not name.
Okay.
And you filled in name and you made
Okay.
position to nil. So
Good.
we're trying to the position is empty. And we're gonna get it's gonna come back red, but with no failures because you didn't do a validate yet.
Yeah, with no errors.
No errors.
No errors because we haven't put in the validation yet. Cool. So what do I need to do in here? Validates can take infinite numbers of arguments. And just the last one has to be presence in our case.
So after name, you can do, after that comma, you're gonna write whatever that class was, position, and then just do a comma.
Hell yeah. Good job, Cliff. All right, who wants to do the next one? I will help, I promise. Better yet. Who's not feeling comfortable with this stuff? All right, Elijah, let's do it. Elijah, I am pasting this test that I just wrote. We want to test for number. So looking at line 21, what do I need to change on line 21?
Change position to number.
Okay, looking at line 22, what do I need to change about line 22?
Change number to nil.
Okay, is there anything else I need to correct?
Position, do you need to put something in position?
I do. Let's bring back offensive QB. Okay, what do I need to do with line 24?
Change position to number.
Cool. What do I need to do with line 26?
Same, just change both of those positions to number, or yeah, number.
Cool. And then what are we making an expectation on right here?
We're
Somebody other than Elijah. Oh, or go for it.
I was just saying to not be empty, or
yeah, we're gonna look for some sort of error associated with number. And we haven't written that code yet, so what color test are we gonna get?
red.
Red. 3 examples, 1 failure. Expected numbers to be expected errors to not be empty, as in to be false, but it got true, so it was empty, and we were looking for can't be blank. All right, I go into player. Validates can take an infinite number of arguments, but the last one always has to be presence true for what we're doing right now. Validates can do lots of different kinds of validation, so presence will not be using those ones. What are we going to do for number?
We can add that after position, right?
You betcha. All right, now what do I do?
Yeah, just run it now.
Good job. Does this look complicated? Right here, does this code look complicated? Yeah, you can. You can throw regex in there. how many tests have I really written though? That's my first question. How many tests have I really written? One. I'm adapting my other tests to fill in these categories and situations that I'm looking for. Okay, let's do another kind of validation. So if I wanted to, we have something for position. So by the way, you want validations on all of your data columns for presence. You want to make sure they're always presence equals true. But I want to add in another kind of validation. Let's do it. Requires a minimum number of characters per position. Since we know that offensive and defensive, like I have like what? OFFENSIVE, 9 characters, or is it OFENI? Yeah.
OFF.
And then defensive has, yeah, essentially 9 or 10 characters, right? All together. So like we know that we need at least 10 characters for this. And if you're not sending that to me, you're kind of, lying to the system. So let's write a test that double checks that you're at least sending 10 characters for offensive and defensive. So let's do that. I need someone to help me write a variable that's going to check an active record query. If we do this in 3 minutes, I'll get you guys the challenges.
Let's start with the variable. Let's call it test or player, whichever is easiest. Equals player dot create. We'll have to go through the same columns that we assigned to it. So name, position, number, tackle.
Cool. Let's do it. Okay, but we're going to be checking for a minimum of 10 characters. So what do we not want in our position field?
Hard coded of a position, I guess.
I want less than 10 characters.
Oh, okay.
Say a minimum of 10 characters per position. I feel like I'm losing people. I can see some eyes glazing over.
Well, at some point we'd have to do like position dot length, wouldn't we, or something like that?
Not yet.
Of it.
This test is checking someone injecting data into our database. So we don't actually need to do any logic.
Okay, so it's gonna print player dot errors with the symbol position.
Okay.
And then we'll have that to not or to be.
Okay, so this print is just kind of like a console log. This print is just us gaining some information as developers. I can even pass to this a print like I can pass to it a flag, right? This is just a print command, and this is going to show up in my server or in my terminal when I'm running my tests. So now I'm going to call on player.errors position. And we don't actually know what this error looks like yet, do we?
No, so can we just run it and see what it shoots back at us?
I think what we should do is we should add this to not be empty, because I don't think it'll shoot much of anything back at us Actually, I take that back. It will shoot something back at us. Let's just do that first. So let's just do this kind of console log / print to our server or terminal. Okay, I got to be really careful, right? I got to be careful because I got green. Why did I get green here on this last test? We just wrote it. I haven't written the code for it.
Because the validate is as long as it's not empty.
Because I don't have any expect statements. There's nothing it's testing. There's no assertion of what should or should not be happening here. And what is the response that I got?
An empty an array.
Right, because
We're just printing out what it is.
yeah, because there's no validation on this stuff yet. So I'm actually going to go back. I'm just going to grab this expectation statement on not caring what error it is, but we're going to throw this expect statement in here. I don't care that what error it is. I just want there to be an error so that when I run this code, I get what color? But red. Red, green, refactor. So let's go make this green. What do I need to do for my validations to make this green?
Have position not be empty.
You need a type of validation that checks to make sure it has a minimum number of characters.
Yep. All right, let's do this. Oh, check this out. I just did a quick Command F search, found length, hit length. This helper validates the length. Class person, that looks normal. Application validates name. Okay, length takes an object as its argument of minimum and then a number. That's pretty cool, right? Do I have to remember this to make this work?
You can always Google it and else copy it.
And I can also just copy this right here.
So then we would change the 2 to 10 and then position, name the position.
Why reinvent the wheel? Just use the syntax that's already available to me.
So is the reason why we use another validate is because we're strictly checking the length of only position.
Right now, we're only checking the length of the position, correct?
Yeah.
But each validation takes the validation that you're looking at for those columns as the last argument. So we have to have a new validates for every single kind of validation that we're doing. It would require another line. Maximum and minimum are different validations. Okay, but look at this. I still got expected can't be blank is too short. Minimum is 10 characters.
So can we?
Hang on. I want everyone to see this. Everyone see this. Can I get someone to read this out loud?
Player model throws an error, position is empty, failure error.
Pause. Someone else read that slower.
Player model throws an error if position is empty.
Is that the test we're working on?
No.
What test was that?
Length.
We're working on test, but emptiness isn't the test we're working on.
Line 21.
Look at this. Look at what we said to equal. It failed on this exact line 19 right here. Expected can't be blank. Look, what kind of data type is this right here? This expectation.
It's an array of a string.
It's an array.
What did it get?
It got an array with two different values in it.
With two different strings. One of them being can't be blank, but it's also nil, so it's less than 10 characters.
So then would you just have to copy and put that up there or just take that out?
Or we can say position at the 0th to be can't be blank. Because it's an array. And I can look at the first index of the array. Zeroth. Thank you. Crazy, huh? So look at that. We talked about this earlier. Look at this. What did we say about TDD? If changes in the future are made, we can know if it'll break older code. What did we just do?
We broke older code, but was able to fix it because we knew what we were looking for.
We made changes in the future and it went back and it caused issues for older code. Pretty cool, huh?
I think it's convenient. It tells you exactly what it's expecting, what you got. I think that
Yes,
helps.
I think so too. All right, any questions? Okay, quick recap. I'm gonna run through some ideas with y'all. What is the name of the gem that we are using to do testing? Feel free to look up in the syllabus. Somebody other than Cody on this one.
RSpec.
RSpec, cool. When we install RSpec and then we start making models, what's the new file or folders that it makes for us? Starts with an S and it's got 4 letters.
Spec.
Spec. We make a model, so inside of spec models, there's a new spec file in regards to our new model. All right, where do we write tests for our models?
In the spec,
In the spec file. Where do we write validations for our models?
player RB,
File.
or
In the models file. Validations can have how many arguments?
Limiting, like maybe
Unlimited.
give it.
Yeah.
unlimited.
What do the arguments need to be?
Objects
Symbols?
Specifically,
or symbols
of what?
of the data columns.
Of the data columns. Cool. They have to be symbols of the columns in our data for that model itself. And then the last argument of validations need to be what?
True.
Close.
Boolean.
Close.
Presence.
So presence is one option.
Like a helper method?
It's the actual validation type itself. Each validates is the same method. The last argument it gets is what kind of validation you're looking for. All right, when I'm writing a test where my goal is to throw an error and I haven't written a validation yet, what kind of color does my test come back as?
Red.
Red.
Red represents a failure. I'm failing because I don't have a what?
Validation.
Expect statement.
Expect statement.
I do have an expect statement if I have a red. It's failing because I don't have an error. So we need to separate failures and errors out in our heads. I'm failing because I don't have an error. Once I get my validation error, specifically I'm rejecting the data, What color does my test come back as?
Green.
Green. Cool. If we write a good first test, how much writing of other tests do we really need to do?
Not a lot.
Not a lot. If I'm looking for more ways to validate something and I don't know them off the top of my head, what do?
Google.com.
Google.
Google it. Or
Ask Austin.
Cool. I'm about
no.
to say the
Check the
same thing.
documentation.
Or syllabus. Rails got the Rails documentation, and also hit up Slack for your coworkers. Maybe they know a helpful validation. Ask the Google machine before you ask Kelly. Kelly won't always be there for you. I know she wants to be. All right.